Last week, we extensively covered what is the genuinely horrific and unfolding mass famine, now imminent by all accounts for the 2.2 million people in Gaza who have already been suffering in an indescribable way for 6 full months now, as they have been bombarded by one of the world's most powerful armies, backed by the world's most powerful and richest countries on earth. That's the United States government, of course, and that famine has only worsened since then. There are many documented reports of Palestinian children and Palestinian women who are dying of starvation, of babies being born in nurseries who don't even have enough nutrition to cry upon birth, who are being born stillborn. It is beyond horrific. This is not coming from the, quote, Gaza-run health ministry, but from Western doctors and nurses and healthcare workers and aid organizations that are attempting to get aid into Israel, and yet have one reason and one reason only they are not able to, and that's because the Israeli government, the Israeli military, and increasingly Israeli civilians are devoted to, by their own admission, preventing food and water from entering Gaza. Not that they refuse to feed the people of Gaza, no one's asking them to do that, but they are preventing trucks filled with food and water, life-saving food and water and medication to enter Gaza. Last week, the World Bank, as The Guardian reported on March 20th, documented that, quote, there is an imminent risk of catastrophic famine in the Gaza Strip. Let's put the article up on the screen. There you see the headline. The findings come as the UN Secretary General calls on Israel to give unconditional access to Gaza for aid relief. And of course, since then, the UN Security Council voted 14-0 with one abstention, which was the United States, to call for an immediate ceasefire, as well as a release of the hostages by Hamas. The Israelis have said they view that as non-binding and intend to ignore the UN Security Council resolution, and as a result, the Israelis are now also taking further action to impede the ability to bring life-saving aid into the population, the civilian population of Gaza. From The Guardian on March 25th, Israel will no longer approve UNRWA food aid to northern Gaza, agency says. That's the UN agency they accused on very dubious grounds of having had members of it participate in the October 7th attack. That is by far the agency most responsible for bringing in the most amount of aid to the people of Gaza. The Israelis have purposely attacked it, knowing that it brings in the greatest amount of aid, and the Israelis now say they will now prohibit UNRWA from bringing any aid at all. Quote, the head of the agency says the military authorities told the UN that convoys will no longer be approved amid a, quote, man-made famine. Increasingly, Israeli civilians, including settlers in the West Bank, who by all accounts are illegally occupying the West Bank, have been openly speaking about their desire to remove, to ethnically cleanse Gaza of all Arabs, all Palestinians, and have Israel annex Gaza, a view that several members of the Israeli government have explicitly stated before October 7th. They want to take over Gaza and build settlements and high-rises on Gaza. From the BBC on March 24th, Jewish settlers set their sights on Gaza beachfront. For some in the Israeli cabinet, the Palestinian territory, now drenched in blood, is ripe for resettlement. That includes Israel's hard-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, a settler himself. In late January, he made his way through a packed conference hall, slowed by embraces and handshakes. He was among friends. About 1,000 ultra-nationalists pushing for a return to Gaza at the event entitled Settlement Brings Security. Mr. Ben-Gvir, who favors, quote, encouraging immigration, was among a dozen cabinet ministers in attendance. Quote, it's time to go back home, he said from the stage to loud applause. It's time to return to the land of Israel. If we don't want another October 7th, we need to return home and control the land, meaning not the West Bank, which they already control, but Gaza. Now, Jeremy Loffredo is an independent journalist, and at the very start of the war in Gaza, he went to pro-Israel protest in the United States and interviewed many people. And we've showed you those videos many times. There were all kinds of people. You may remember at the start of the war, it was being alleged that people at pro-Palestinian protests were hateful, were expressing genocidal views, and yet he went to pro-Israel protests, and there were many people who he videoed, who he interviewed, saying things like, kill all Arabs in Gaza, turn it into a parking lot, flatten Gaza. Statements as genocidal as it gets. And then he traveled to the West Bank in November, where he documented many of the horrific abuses that have emerged in the wake of October 7th, not in Gaza, where a lot of media attention is devoted at least, but in the West Bank that has been largely ignored, where Hamas is not governing, and yet Israeli settlers have been given guns, have been deputized, and have unleashed a wave of violence. And so Jeremy did some pretty intrepid and brave and important reporting. He went to the West Bank. He met up with settlers who are among the most extremist activists in Israel, and they are organizing blockades, civilian blockades of aid trucks into Gaza. Whenever they see a truck carrying flour or food or water, they physically block the truck and they refuse to move. And they're supported and backed by the Israeli military. That's one of the reasons aid cannot get into Israel, is because Israeli settlers, activists, civilians are physically blocking it. And the Israeli military helps them. And Jeremy went and embedded with them and interviewed them about what their beliefs are and why it is that they're trying to keep food out of Gaza, why they believe that mass starvation is something that the Gazans deserve. And we're about to talk to Jeremy in an interview that we taped with him just a few minutes before we went on air. But here is he published an 18-minute documentary for The Gray Zone, which I hope you'll watch in its entirety on YouTube. Here are a few excerpts from it that we chose to show you that we think really illustrate the mentality of not a fringe group of Israelis, but many, many Israelis, including the ones who are now organizing to block food and water from entering Gaza, knowing that there's a famine there. What are we trying to do to block the aid trucks from crossing into Gaza? And from Egypt, it will go to the people of Gaza. And to Hamas, it will help Hamas. It's very successful. Look, the aid trucks were supposed to be entering Gaza from 10 in the morning to today, and we are blocking them from entering. It's been days since aid trucks have passed through. So there you have it. It works. I think what we need to be united and kill all of them. We all need to go back into Gaza and control all of it. Make it part of our country.
On the trailer of this truck is
wheat flour for the starving and besieged people of the...
But this humanitarian aid and thousands more aid shipments are not making it to the Palestinians in Gaza because Israelis have decided to engage in a direct action blockade.
The people of Israel live...
For over a week, I embedded myself with Jewish Israeli nationalists who believe it's a worthy cause and even a religious duty to drive hours from the comfort of their illegal settlements in the West Bank and residential neighborhoods in Jerusalem and bring their loved ones to the Karim Shalom and Nitzana border crossings to block the humanitarian aid trucks from delivering desperately needed food to starving Palestinians. At around 6 in the morning, a bus departs from Jerusalem. It heads south, passing through the West Bank, with stops at a handful of illegal, highly militarized Israeli settlements to pick up dozens of extremist miners and bring them to the borders of Gaza and Egypt. Once the settlers arrive there, they're met by dozens of other Israelis who drove themselves and their families to the border by navigating the back roads of southern Israeli kibbutzim. The border crossings are designated by Israel as closed military zones. Any civilian in the area is supposed to be swiftly removed and arrested. Instead, the military and police are actively supporting and encouraging these illegal humanitarian aid blocks. As soon as the settlers show up at these crossings, the military, meant to secure the area, stands down and guides everyone to the border gates. Then, the Israeli military uses the presence of civilians, which they invited and escorted, to justify the closing of the humanitarian aid crossing gate for hours and sometimes entire days. The trucks are supposed to pass through Israel from Egypt for inspection. Once inspected by the Israeli authorities, they head into Gaza. Officially, the protesters justify the blocking of aid by insisting it's all going to Hamas, a claim repeated by the Israeli government, even as the U.S. State Department stringently rejects it.
So no food, no nothing?
No, they don't deserve it. What I care? Kill them. I don't care.
Do you trust Palestinians?
No. I know all about them. I don't trust them. I want them out of here.
What do you think should happen to Gaza?
I want to be civilized with Jews from Israel, so we can be in peace in there.
This young man was present at every aid blocking action for the last 2 weeks. He was in Gaza for the first 2 months of the military operation.
We've been training for 1 month and then we got inside Gaza. And then we've been there for 2 months. My unit was in charge of explosions. We blew up houses of terrorists, mosque, UN offices. I remember we got into some UN office that was in charge of helping families in Gaza that was affected by the war, and we destroyed it. We've been dealing with the tunnels.
Were you ever in a tunnel?
No, we didn't, but we have the equipment to investigate what's happening there and then to destroy it.
We love the Gaza Strip. We can't just take a whole strip of land and say Israelis can't live there. That doesn't make sense. This is our sovereign state.
Would you live there?
Of course.
By the beach?
Oh, for sure. Yes, my husband's also talking about building. He has a yeshiva, a Talmudic institute here, so building a branch in Gaza. We have lists already about 500 families that are willing, on the drop of a hat, to just move into. We have North, Central, and South Gaza, and people are going to start building towns. We have names of the towns. We have where we're building them. It's already being planned, and we have people signed up. You can't leave it without Jews in the Gaza Strip. It's too big a piece of land. It's too important for us to let it become Hamas town, as we call it, full of terrorists.
So that is just a small portion of the full documentary that he published that I cannot recommend highly enough. The title of it is Kill Them All Inside the Israeli Blockade on Gaza Aid, and it shows entire families. It shows small children being brought by the Israeli settlers, being taught to justify the starvation of Gazan children, of the entire Gazan society. Obviously, when you're blocking food from entering Gaza, you can't just block food that's destined for Hamas. You're blocking food for the entire population. And everybody knows in the world that there is mass famine now taking place inside Gaza. Obviously, the people who are going to die first are the most vulnerable, and that's exactly who is dying: weaker women, older people, disabled people, and especially young children and babies. And they're not just dying of bombs, they're dying of hunger, starvation. Their bodies are consuming itself. It's the worst and most painful, prolonged way to die possible. And we're now going to go from tens to hundreds to thousands and potentially tens of thousands. That's what mass catastrophic famine is. And the aid organizations are saying that when they go, they are blocked by the Israelis from entering. And here you have Israeli civilians backed by the Israeli government who are justifying it and who are organizing their own blockade as well. Jeremy Loffredo went there and embedded with them, and he did a remarkable piece of journalism that I hope you'll watch. And just a few minutes ago, we sat down with him to talk about what he saw, not only when he went to the border of Gaza with these Israeli settlers, but when he went to the West Bank in November, when he spent weeks going to pro-Israel protests in the United States, and he documented everything he saw. He's an excellent reporter, and here is our conversation with him from just a few minutes ago before we went on air today. Jeremy, good evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Good to see you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, sure. So congratulations on this documentary, which I hope everybody will see. One of the things you did in order to produce it was you embedded in a movement of, I guess you could call them nationalists or extremists, people who are organizing to block aid from entering Gaza. How is it that you managed to embed yourself with them and get them to speak with you so openly, to the extent that you can talk about that?
I began by taking a bus. They had shuttles going from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv south through various illegal settlements in the West Bank, picking up extremist youth in the West Bank and bringing them down, shipping them down, shuttling down to the Nitzana border crossing and the Karim Shalom border crossing. And I was traveling with them for a few days. And then they began to, recognize my face. They would see me often, and that's when they began to be very candid with me. And they would admit to how they feel about people in Palestine. They would admit to various crimes they've committed in Gaza as reservists. And I just got them to be very comfortable around me.
So were you basically undercover? In other words, did they think that you were kind of one of them, that you were a supporter of theirs, that you were there to work with them? Or did they think that you were a journalist? Or what was their perception of who you were and what you were doing there?
They knew I was a journalist. I had my camera with me at all times. I was interviewing people out in the open. But I think because I was spending so much time with them and I was there every day, they began to recognize my face and feel more comfortable with me, arguably more comfortable than they should have been. And, as the days have passed, they became comfortable enough to speak with me on camera and admit to things that maybe they should not have.
So one of the things that you did that I was aware of and that I actually commented on and promoted was at the start of the war, you went to some of the pro-Israel protests and you interviewed some of the people who were in the United States, both American citizens, but also Israelis and others who were present at some of these pro-Israeli protests, and they were saying a lot of things that I think a lot of Israel supporters in the United States were trying to pretend didn't exist. So before we get to their kind of cousins, ideological cousins in Israel and these settlements that you just spent your time with, let's try and remember back in October and November the kinds of things that some of these people at these pro-Israel protests in the United States were saying that you were able to show on the videos that you made.
These people in New York, this is October 8th, 9th, 10th, they were candidly saying that Israel needs to turn Gaza into a parking lot. They were showing me memes on their phones of Gaza as a parking lot, saying that we should only have Gaza again if it's populated only with Jewish people. And people online and people, supporters of Israel were saying, this is not how actual Israelis feel. This is just extremists in New York. These are youth. They don't know what they're talking about. But it turns out that this is very much the same type of ideology spouted by not only the military protecting the border crossings, the aid crossings in Israel, but also all of the Israelis that are going there to block the aid. It's a very much a mainstream opinion.
Yeah, well, that's what I want to ask you. So obviously, when you're talking about the border between Israel and Gaza, which is a border of a war zone, obviously it's incredibly militarized. There's the IDF all over the place. There's government surveillance. Obviously, what these citizens of Israel are doing in terms of going and blocking trucks, humanitarian trucks with food and water from entering Gaza could not possibly be done without both the knowledge and the consent of the Israeli government and the Israeli military. What is it that you saw in terms of both the presence of the Israeli government and the Israeli military in these actions, and what was their posture toward the protesters?
That's one of the most important points to take away from this film. It's the collaboration between the Israeli civilians that are traveling to this border and the Israeli military that are supposed to be protecting the border. The border is technically a closed military zone. Now, any civilian in this closed military zone is supposed to be swiftly removed and arrested. Now, when these settlers and these extremists would go to the border, they would be ushered in and they would be shown where they should be, which is right in front of the border crossing, the aid crossing. And then the military, instead of arresting everyone and sending them back up north, they're giving them watermelon, they're giving them snacks. The protesters, the so-called protesters, are giving the military sandwiches, ice water. It's very collaborative. They're breaking the law. They're being allowed to break the law because it is a government policy that as little aid as possible should be going into Gaza. And it's also the popular political opinion amongst Israeli civilians. So the government, the military in these areas justifies closing the border by saying, oh no, there's civilians here. We can't open the border up into Gaza or into Egypt. So they invite the civilians and then they use the civilians as justification for stopping the humanitarian aid every day. This is like clockwork. They do this.
So I imagine that one of the objections that an Israel supporter would have, who not the kind who would empathize with these kind of sentiments, but would be embarrassed by Them would be, well, basically what you did was you went and found the most extremist elements inside Israel. These are like very fringe people. They're people who live in settlements. These are people who are way more extreme than even the Israeli government is. It's sort of like akin to going to, say, a Proud Boys or even a Ku Klux Klan rally inside the United States and interviewing them and then offering that up as evidence of what the American people writ large believe about race or other issues. What would your answer be to that objection?
My answer would be that it's clearly the government's response to this is to allow these people to break the law because they are in favor of what they're doing. This is, these are not, Israeli soldiers acting on their own volition, allowing these people to break the law at an international border crossing. This is, an IDF soldier who hears from their boss, hears from their boss, hears from their boss, hears from the head office. They're allowing these people to break the law over and over again in one of the most sensitive, militarized areas of the entire country. So I think that shows that this is the government's opinion that there should not be aid going there. And that's also the civilians' opinion. When I'm in Jerusalem, walking around Jerusalem, I'm talking to people, telling them what I've been doing. It's very obvious to them that there should not be aid. Why should there be aid going to the enemy? It's just like it's a common sense thing to them. So I don't believe it's a fringe political idea. It maybe is fringe that people are willing to take off work and get out of school to go down to this border. But the Israeli civilians in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, from what I've seen and from what I've heard, they can't take off work, but they support those who can.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.